talking about that. That just means that means no more dancing on the road. Okay.
I think so. They're sending me a video they want to show.
Last minute stuff.
So we still have
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Yeah, do you have a speaker? Do you have one?
I understand.
So I don't even know if we have anything to say because
I think I was
we're going to say this about the
informal. Oh, I have a.
informal,
So,
informal
He
thing.
has a
That's what it
slide
was.
on the list.
Oh, you have a slide on the
He
list.
does, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll
Can I
talk
see the
about
slide
that.
on the list?
Yeah,
Yeah, here.
Sorry.
It looks like this.
Oh, no, that's fine. And you could get up and.
It looks like that right now. That's it. And then we're gonna say that. I was gonna drag Alexi up and say, here, tell us what your plans are.
Perfect. Perfect. That's a good plan. Okay. And in our spot, we're just going to think about the informal.
Okay. Okay.
I can't.
You can't find it?
I can't.
Well, then we're not going to be able to do it then.
Yeah. Unless I can figure out where the hell that thing went. All right. So let me put this up. The video, I don't know where it went, and we're out of time to deal with it. Sorry, it was last minute. Try here. Let's try this. Okay, the thing, I can't get at anything. The network is just not responsive. Nope, I can't take sticks. I can't take foreign sticks.
Sure. So I guess
It's last minute, sorry.
I guess I worry about something where you're not going to lose it. So, like basically about the things you're maybe all of these actual use cases of ignorance, right? Because I mean, the basic premise.
Oh, now I've got something.
Okay.
This was the little thing that, you know, or possibly work. This is available beyond that. To now wait where I feel like I'll even use it for investment. Sure, I can do that. The second thing.
Okay, so I think we're good to go.
Yeah, I'm just let me put this in.
Wow.
What? Oh, yeah.
It's
Thanks.
funny they gave us one for dispatch and one for art area meeting.
Everybody's like, oh,
Right. Different room.
Okay, we're getting ready to get started, people, so people can sit down.
Let me think about this.
Okay.
We just need more. He's straight on access on that thing. It was there, but very quiet.
Yes.
Okay, people hear me? Okay, this is on. Okay, I'm going to pass around the blue sheets. I think most people know what's going on with those. Sign your name.
We're almost set with the AV here. What's
Shouldn't have done that better.
This is all twisted. Okay, so I think I have something. Okay, I guess I could play that.
Okay.
All right, start iconifying things that I don't want people to see. I have, okay, that slide needs to stay up. Something happening?
It says you don't have a
It's
signal.
all right. It's coming. There it goes.
Oh, there we go. Okay. You know, we've got a pretty small room here.
I get that thing to go away, that icon at the bottom. Oh, there it went. Okay. We ready?
Yep.
Wow, we're going to be standing room only today, it looks like. Okay, great.
Yeah, there are seats up in the front here.
Yep. You don't have to be an area director to sit up front.
Won't even make you an area director.
You might. I was in a meeting on Sunday in Buenos Aires and someone said, you should go away before you catch a dot. All right, welcome to dispatch and the art area meeting. Blue sheets are circulating. The usual note, well, if you can't read the fine print, my favorite reduced version is you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say in this room can be used by the IETF as a contribution. You have obligations under BCPs 78 and 79. Please read those if you're not familiar with them. Blue sheets are on the way around. We have a scribe and a note taker, a minute taker. Thank you very much for volunteering. Remarks from the chairs. Mary's going to talk briefly about the deadlines for IETF 97.
Right, and so this is the general approach we've taken in dispatch since 2009, but since we've had the merger, we kind of want to emphasize the model that we've been working by. So we have a model where 4 weeks before the draft deadline, people should be letting the chairs know that something's coming in. A week after that, the expectation is there's been some discussion on the list started so that people have the opportunity, again, because this is new work, people need time to consider it so that when we come here, we're ready to make decisions. And so then the chairs get together with the ADs after we've got our list of topics and we talk about what we think is close to go, should be discussed, et cetera. And then we were very remiss this time. We're still a little bit disorganized in this respect in getting everybody together at the same time to talk about this. So we did actually not get that out there to the list. And for that, we apologize. We need to get more disciplined as well. And then there's the draft deadline. So we would like people to kind of work from this model, and because we had several documents that just showed up on the list, you know, at the draft deadline time and such like that. So, okay.
We were in the applications area prior to the merger. We're a little bit generous about allowing these sorts of things in, especially when we had a lot of time on the agenda. With the merged area, we're planning to follow the dispatch model more. So we will be a lot more strict in the future about last minute, hey, can I get some time on FaceTime about that? So the answer is going to be no, unless you follow the dispatch model in the future. You know who I'm talking to. Any questions on this? All right. There seems to be some ongoing confusion about what to use the mailing lists for. We have the legacy apps discussed list, and we have the dispatch mailing lists for the working group. Apps discuss was unique in that it was a combined mailing list. It was the general discussion area for the applications area, a discussion list for the applications area, and was also the working group list for apps AWG. Those have now all merged into dispatch. So the idea that we have at the moment is that apps discuss is for conversations about topics of interest that haven't spawned actual IETF work yet or may not. But if you have actual work documents you want to find a home for, those conversations should happen on the dispatch list. That's where we are now. Alexei is at the mic on this topic.
Sorry, my voice is already gone for various reasons. I think the plan is we will create a new working mailing list, ART. We're planning to move the subscription from Apps Discuss and RAI to this new mailing list, and Apps Discuss will remain as a redirect, just because people are used to it. So hopefully it will be slightly more obvious that general area topics sent to ART, and all specific work, at some point you might be redirected to dispatch, or you go directly to dispatch.
It'll help when apps AWG actually shuts down too.
Mark Nottingham, can I make the smallest of suggestions? The link on the last slide to the policy for the working group isn't available with the charter as far as I can tell, and it's not on the working group archive list, and it's not on the email banner for messages to the working group. Since you have a lot of new people, it'd be nice to make that more discoverable.
Right. Well, that's been something that's been discussed on the work group chairs mailing list, right? With the tools thing, that became much less visible to be able to quickly get to the wiki, right? Okay.
Well, for example, there's a banner on the bottom of every email to the list that contains a link to the list archive. A much more useful link would be a link to that.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Sorry.
Any quick questions about that, or move on? So Alexei will make that change sometime after this meeting, like in a week, 2 weeks, something soon.
I'll initiate it this week.
All right, thanks. So outstanding items from dispatch, things we didn't handle since the last meeting. We had 2 of those.
Right. Yeah. Right. So these are the things that okay. So the Holmberg dispatch MCPTT, this one we had discussed, it required some more discussion, but this one I think we're ready to go ahead and AD sponsor that one and get that moved forward. And the wine ronk, the last diverting line ID, I know Sheeta's been working with Nigel on that. I don't think that one's yet ready to go somewhere because the discussion has not come back to the mailing list. So once that does, then we can circle back and see what we're going to do with that, right? Because the suggestion is that one should be used, you could possibly use history info versus define a new header. So.
And quickly on AppCWG, we have 2 items left to wrap up. I think they're both ready for second working group last calls. There's been substantial development on both of them since the first ones. I think Alexia owes us, you're going to post a version with that. And I think file scheme is just for Dave Proctor. I saw is in the room. He's shepherding this one. I think it's ready as well. Big shrug. Okay, I'll sync up with you, but we still want to get AppCWG wrapped up soon. So those are our last 2 outstanding items. So our ADs.
Our ADs obviously hadn't planned who was going to go to the mic. We don't really have, I'm Ben Campbell, thank you. And everyone should state their name when they come to the microphone.
That's what the little sign tells you.
I can't read
Nobody
it that
reads
close. So we have been Art for roughly a year. And we would like to start soliciting some feedback on how people think the merger has gone. We're not to the point of being able to do a formal framing of that conversation yet, but I would encourage anyone who has thoughts on the matters to find one of the ADs this week and talk to them about it. And we would appreciate that greatly. Did I miss anything? Thank you.
Does everybody know our ADs? Should we introduce them again? These are the 3 of them. So find one of them if you have feedback on how the area has gone, merger has gone, and go ahead.
We will also be trying to find you, so it goes both ways. I already started cornering some people yesterday, so. My name is Alyssa Cooper.
Could I just point out one thing?
Name, please.
Phil Helen Baker. Could I just point out one synchronization thing that seems to have failed? This room is half the size of the room over there, and they have a quarter of the number of people.
Yeah, but that's.
I'm not sure that's an area merge point.
I don't think so. It's just closer
I
to
just
I think we do.
I
Like
clicked the
200.
button that says copy everything from the last meeting.
And I think we put like 200. It's
Yeah.
a big number that's in there.
Okay. We're ahead of schedule. So I don't know if any of these people are in the room, but I invited all the suspects to talk about the BOFs and the new working groups that are of possible interest to Art. If any are in the room in no particular order, come on up to the mic, give your quick rundown on what the work is. But this is the full list of BOFs that we have for 96. Go ahead, Ted. Can you do all 8?
No. I'm Ted Hardy, and I'm not here to do all 8.
All right.
I thought Jana was going to do quick, but since I don't see him, I'll do quickly. Quick is a BOF to look at a UDP-based transport. It was originally described in a set of documents that kind of described it as a monolith using HTTP as the driving application. The current theory is to actually split the work into multiple different documents and to host it in the TSV area where a common wire protocol will be defined. There will be a series of mappings from applications to use that wire protocol in its kind of multiplexing frames. HTTP will be the first of those using protocols if approved. There's also work here that relates to TLS 1.3, but will happen again as part of the split. So this is taking something that was developed in industry, bringing it in for standardization, and making it into the building blocks that would be reusable by various other pieces. Plus, also related to UDP, but not quite the same thing. Plus is based on the idea that historically transports have had an implicit path layer where the transport messages like SYN and ACK, et cetera, were visible to the path. Because in encrypted transports, these are not necessarily visible to the path. there may be an opportunity here to create an explicit mechanism to talk to the path or to have the path talk to you. And so those are the two I was going to mention.
All right, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Yaron Sheffer. I'm co-chair of LERC, together with Eric Berger, who's not here this week. LERC is about allowing CDNs to terminate TLS connections, so to work with TLS encrypted traffic, which they do today quite happily, but today you need to give them your private key, and people are not happy with that. So we are looking at different ways of having our cake and eating it too. So having them terminate TLS, but not giving the CDN their private key. This is our second BOF, and we have a charter proposal on the table. So hopefully so we will get consensus around the new charter, and we'll be forming a working group today. It's today, 6 to 8 p.m., and you're all welcome.
All right. Okay. So Ledger is a non-working group forming BOF.
Adam Roach.
Sorry, Adam Roach. Yeah. Ledger is a non-working group forming BOF that is going to sort of discuss, as an exploratory exercise, a means of transferring money using sort of routing protocols and cryptographic assertions that guarantees that funds will either flow forward or flow backwards in a way that's trackable. It uses something akin to blockchains to do all of this. So security guys show up, certainly, and anyone who has any background in like financial stuff. We're meeting Thursday at 4:20, if I recall correctly.
This is Russ Housley. I'm chairing the ITS BOF. Intelligent Transportation Systems was a very broad topic last meeting. This meeting, we've greatly narrowed the charter, and we're talking about how to do IPv6 over 802.11p, which is the dedicated spectrum that automotives use for automotive to automotive and automotive to roadside devices.
Great, thank you, everybody. And 2 new working groups meeting for the first time this week. Or at least they've been chartered since the last one. I'm not certain they're both meeting. Anybody here for either of those? They are? Thanks. Especially the meeting one, I hope. Your trouble.
Ben Campbell, you done with the slide?
No, I can go to the next one.
Okay.
This one?
No, back up.
Back to right.
I think we missed, no, new working groups. We missed SIP Brandy.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Oh.
So,
when was it approved? Because
It was just.
approved.
Oh, all right, that's fine.
Yeah.
So SIP Brandy is a new working group meeting this week for the first time. It's talking about end-to-end security for RTP when signaled by SIP for point-to-point type communication.
Could you go back one slide? Alyssa Cooper. We also missed iMeeting, right? Whoops. So iMeeting is it's not really a BOF. It's just an informational session about aspects relating to international meeting arrangements, primarily human rights. We are having a couple of outside experts come and talk to us as a result of some of the IETF 100 discussions. Thanks.
Okay. If there's nothing else on working groups and BOFs, we'll go to GGIE. Or not.
Kind of just, I probably Ben should have said this, but I'm Jonathan Lennox. Just warning people that we've got the last minute schedule changes. We're trying to move everything else out of the way of conflicting with Quick. So M-Music is moving to the Friday afternoon session, which was RTC Web's second session, and AVT Core is moving to share the slot with AVTX on Tuesday evening.
Cool.
this is Ben again, who should have sat closer to the mic. I wanted to confirm that is actually the change has been approved, and the secretary will be sending it out sometime today. I was just in the process of typing an email to say that, but you did it faster.
Okay, now we can go to glass internet ecosystem. Leslie or Glenn's here, right? Yes.
You have to
You have to
stand in
stand
the pink
box.
box.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me,
Yeah.
let me get your,
The bigger box is useful. Yes, excellent.
you,
Ready to go? Almost.
oh, it's on the other side. 1 second. There we go. There you go.
Okay. Hey, so I'm Glenn Dean from NBC Universal. We're going to talk about problem today with internet video. If you remember, way back to when we were when we hosted IETF in was Orlando. Oh, closer.
Point it straight to your mouth.
Better?
Yes.
So when we hosted IETF back in Orlando, we had a gentleman named Glenn Reitmeyer from NBC come down and give the keynote, or not the keynote, but the sort of the host talk during one of the plenaries. And one of the things we talked about back then was how, as we were moving more and more content to internet as a delivery channel, we were noticing and learning that sometimes we had performance problems and we had scalability problems. And it's because we have a lot more bandwidth when you look at broadcast, and we have a lot more bandwidth when you look at cable systems than we do with pure internet. And as we started doing the math of, how do we grow the internet video as a delivery channel, what does it look like? And math we came back with was pretty bad. We were way under capacity. And this kind of motivated us to start looking at internet video as a bigger problem. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So the work that's come out of that. Next slide, please.
Which one I want to go?
And while they're looking
There
for
we
the
go.
button,
Yeah.
the reason we call it glass to glass is it's from the glass of your camera, the lens, all the pieces in between through the glass of consumption of your screen. So end-to-end video. To date, we've produced 2 internet drafts we have submitted. One is the introduction to the overall area and what we're proposing to work on and do about the problem. And the other one is an example document, taking the principles laid out in the first document and then giving an example of how they could be applied to MPEG-. Next slide. So what's the problem? You always have to have the problem you're going to work on. Video is the #1 internet bandwidth user by far. There's not even a close competitor for #2 spot. It is clogging the pipes. And if you look at things like the the visual networking report from Cisco, they project that this is a trend that's going to continue in spades. If you look at reports from places like Sandvine and other people who do measurement, they're reporting that Netflix alone in parts of the US is consuming 50 to 60% of the nighttime bandwidth in most markets. And that's just Netflix. That's not counting YouTube and all the other video sources people are consuming. We got a problem. It's growing, and it continues to grow, and it's growing faster than a pace that we're adding more bandwidth. This is not a sustainable long-term trend. We are going to get to the point where people will want to watch video. They're not going to have the capacity, or the video they're going to be watching is going to get downgraded to lower quality because they can't get it through the pipe. Next slide, please. So, question we got asked a lot when we talked about this. Well, aren't there already solutions? Why are you doing something new? And the answer is, the other solutions are great, and they are important. CDNs and all the work being done to improve CDNs are incredibly important to this. Improve caching. Adding bandwidth is incredibly important. Better codecs, right? We got codec work going on here in the IETF. We got codec work going on other places. Rule of thumb, you get about a 50% compression rate every 10 years out of your codec work. Takes that much time for the research and the R&D to get put into a standard and the whole thing to get rolled out. The trouble is, as we add all these new capacities through bandwidth and better codecs, we're also going crazy, adding new users, new ways of creating video. We got all these cameras now. My cell phone is creating 4K video. We've got new distribution models that are coming out. We have things like Periscope, where people are now live broadcasting events that weren't in the original plan for when we start talking about how do you do video. So we also have another problem. As you keep buying, and I keep buying better and better devices, we keep increase in the amount of data video takes. And roughly, it works out this way. To go from SD to HD was 4 times the amount of data. SD to HD to 4K, which is what I got in this guy, is 16 times the amount of data. If you go talk to folks in Japan, they're now working on 8K. That's another. You see where this is going. We keep clogging the pipes because the data keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the pipes get bigger, but we keep clogging them faster than they can get bigger. So what do? Well, you do all the stuff on the top line there. And the question is, what else can you do? Next slide, please.
Where's my pointer?
So we started asking this question, and we went around and rattled the cages of the usual partners we have in the industry and the internet and said, what do we do about this? Well, the question was, where is the problem? Let's step back and examine the landscape. And so we created a group over in W3C, which said, look, this is a web problem, this is an internet problem. We'll let you host a group in here with the charter of look at the end-to-end video ecosystem and see what you can drive through use case development based upon use cases for today's use of the internet for video, and also what the industry is preparing or delivering for next generation video. Bring those all together, analyze it, and see if things start teasing out that you could do to maybe improve the way video is transported and delivered and consumed. And out of that, we developed 33 use cases. So this is work done in 2015 over in W3C, and a little bit of work done this year in W3C. Out of those 33 use cases, a bunch of trends emerged. And among those trends, there was some stuff that was very IETF specific. It was talking about, well, we'll get into a minute what it's talking about, but it was IETF work, not W3C work. And so as part of the original plan in the group at W3C, we envisioned that work would eventually blossom out into work that we will take and work with other groups outside there that's appropriate and specific for those groups, such as the IETF. Next slide, please. So, stuff that we teased out that are really appropriate for IETF related work. There's 3 main things, 4 in fact. One is we realized the video ecosystem is incredibly complex. I mean, it really is. It's probably the most complex cobbled together application environment I've ever seen in my life. And I'm an engineer, I'm old. I've seen a lot of horror stories. This has a lot of moving parts defined by a lot of different organizations. The beautiful thing here, however, is that those moving parts defined by those different organizations are pretty well encapsulated. This means that you can go twiddle with part of it over here without having to coordinate with the group up here. And you won't break each other. It's very nicely done in that regard. So this gives us an opportunity to make some innovations at different places in the stack to make improvements, and we don't have to coordinate them across all the different groups. It's a very good way to be able to do things. So we ended up teasing out 3 things out of those use cases that we thought were very significant. The first one was, it turns out that when you play video on the internet today, most application environments, the ecosystem doesn't actually know what video is playing. From a device's perspective, he runs an application, somebody pushes a button, and video shows up in a stream in a buffer, and he starts decoding it and puts it on the screen. He doesn't know what he's playing. Now, why does he even need to know what it's playing? It works today, right? Well, it turns out if you want to say to your device, can you find a better source for that video than that cloud you're streaming from or that CDN you're streaming from up way up and high? He can't do that because he doesn't know what he's watching. If you don't know you're watching Mad Max, you can't go find a better copy of Mad Max locally. So step 1, be able to identify the video locally. Find out what it is. Have a way to name it. Number 2, find it. Once you know what it is you've got, how do you find a better copy? Today you really can't. If I'm a typical player, I'm pulling some content down from a CDN. One second. You're pulling from the CDN. You may have a local copy that's actually on your local network. You may have a copy really near you, but you don't know that you have it because you don't recognize that CDN copy and the copy you have near you are in fact the same video. One more line and then I'll give you a chance. Lastly, how do you reference the data? So once I found out that I have a copy of it, how do I address it? How do I talk to it? And with that, I'll give you a chance.
Right, Eric Piscola. So the example you just gave is a movie, and generally the movies are transmitted subject to DRM. So, and those DRM and the encryption keys to those DRM are not the same for different servers for Netflix and for instance, for Netflix and for, Amazon. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is exactly how this is going to work, because there's going to be 2 copies, at least one for every.
Very, very good question. So first of all, let me say the GG stuff isn't just for DRM protected content. It's for all content.
I understand, but a lot of this content is DRM protected. So I'd like to understand how this is going to work for that.
So for DRM protected content, first of all, DRM is out of the scope of GG work. We're not a DRM shop, but for protected content, there are DRM schemes such as ultraviolet, which are designed to have a common encryption key that can actually be used across different surfaces. So in our discussions on that topic, the thinking is that if you build an environment that lets you actually use multiple cache copies from different sources, that you would use a technology like ultraviolet with its common encryption format that will actually let you do shared encryption keys across different platforms.
Does any of Widevine, PlayReady, or FairPlay interested in doing this?
I haven't talked to them about that. Again,
I mean, it's basically all of the internet is one of those 3 services,
it's
right?
a very good question, but as speaking from a studio, because I'm a Hollywood studio, we believe, honestly, that this is not a huge technical barrier and that the technology to solve this is already things that we have in the works.
I mean, everybody uses common encryption, CANC, right?
Right.
But doesn't mean they use common keys, which is the important thing,
But
right?
the key infrastructure, like for instance, if you go look at ultraviolet, ultraviolet was designed to allow you to transport keys across different services. It was designed to solve this problem.
Sure. I mean, it's also these guys also they encode them. They also separately encode them, right? They don't start with they don't start. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is I'm trying to figure out the use cases. Let me just take a step back. I'm trying to figure out what fraction of internet video, the way it's currently practiced, actually could take advantage of this technology.
Actually, a huge amount. If you actually look at internet video, it's a really big split between professional video that's DRM protected and user-generated content that isn't DRM protected. So there's actually, if for a moment, let's just discount DRM. The non-DRM video is a huge amount of the problem, and it's a
Sure, but again, that's also siloed. It's either on Facebook or it's on YouTube. And if it is on both Facebook and YouTube, it's not being compressed to the same algorithms. So I'm just trying to figure out under what's the underlying premise of this design seems to be that you have the same content being provided by different services, but it's the same identical bits that are being moved around in 2 copies, right?
Not always the same identical bits. It may be the same video in different encodings, different formats. I'll get to that. So if you give me let me go through a little more of the deck. We'll get. But excellent points. Not trying to shut you down, but I do think we have.
I mean, it has to be. I mean, it doesn't have identical bits, but it has to be effectively identical bits because you're switching between the iframes.
If you're dashed, so it has to be identical, compatible encodings.
Huh? Yes, I have. That's why I'm asking these questions.
I think I found some answers already. I mean, I read.
Okay, this should be at the mic. Thank you.
Certainly happy to be educated by you, Stefan, always.
Sir.
When I've had discussions with folk doing this in the past and suggesting that we get to more common caching or whatever, the objection that I've heard them come back with is privacy and not wanting other people to know what somebody's watching.
We shall get there.
Yeah, but I'm a little bit worried about a group that's saying, "Oh, DRM is out of our charter." I mean, that's like having a Brexit group that says that money's out of our charter, or an ice cream group that has milk safety out of your charter. DRM, encryption, privacy, these aren't kind of optional extras. Those are the heart and soul of this problem.
By DRM out of our charter, what I specifically mean is we are not developing a DRM. Other people are already doing that. There's lots of groups making DRMs. That's not our job. We'll work with them. Next slide, please.
All right, yes.
So, 2 more observations I want to throw out here, because as engineers, we often think about fixing the future because the past is somebody else's goal we don't want to deal with. That's not acceptable in this case. The internet's full of video that we already have out there, and we have millions of deployed players, maybe billions. So the option to simply say we're going to ignore that, but we're going to fix in the future is not an option in this case. Whatever we do has to be compatible with what's out there today, or what can be evolved from what's out there today. So the solution space needs to be compatible with the past, and it also needs to enable the future. That's the sort of very tough bar we're setting. Next, please. So what are we actually talking about technically? There are three things we're going to walk through here. The first one is a media identifier. This is the question of what am I watching? How do I name it? Not in the sense of the NDN folks. This is a much simpler version. Already, if you look at video out there today, there are a plethora of video identification schemes. IDER is one that we use in the professional industry, right? Ad ID is something that's used in the professional ad industry. Content ID is another one that Google uses. Everybody's got their favorite, and almost every week I see on a mailing list someplace, somebody else has created yet another naming scheme that's gonna rule them all. We're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do instead is really define at a simplest level a standard carrier that carries whatever that blob is that's contextually relevant for the type of video you're watching. If you're gonna watch professional content, it would carry an IDER. If you're gonna watch Bob's content from Bob's content system, it could carry Bob's identifier. Doesn't have to be specific. We're not trying to create one that rules them all. We're trying to create one that carries them all. Okay? This gives us a standard way in electronic program guides and in search engines and in applications to refer to the entity. Yes, listen.
Alyssa Cooper. So for user-generated content, the idea would be that the identifier is associated to the first platform where user-generated content is uploaded, or how does that work?
So it could be the first platform or it could be multiple platforms. So there could be multiples of these things carried in the identifier, but there'd be at least one. So for instance, if I uploaded something to Facebook, Facebook assigns an identifier to that, right? It becomes that moniker. This would be able to carry that Facebook identifier. If they also loaded up to Google or YouTube, sorry, and got a YouTube identifier, we could carry that. So
Okay, but there's no distinct
carrier.
namespace for user-generated content that is agnostic to the
Not yet.
platform.
No, and that would actually be creating another, that would be the case of creating the unified identifier that rules them all. And it's almost impossible task to create that. So this is sort of the next best thing. We'll create a universal carrier to carry them all.
Okay, thanks.
Next, and by the way, an example of one that we could possibly look like here is there is a URI that would carry an IDER for the Minions movie, which, by the way, if you come to the bits and bytes, you can see demoed on a running version of this. We have this actually running in code.
Sorry, just a quick question, Mark Nottingham. Just very naively, it seems like if this was truly glass to glass, it was user-generated content, my camera would be generating the identifier, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. It's a very good point. You know what? It's a big ocean. You can only start boiling in one small spot. So we're boiling on this spot, but you're absolutely right. I do agree that cameras should generate them. Next slide, please. So that identifies the what, okay? The other question is the where. And this is what we call a media encoding network. So the idea here being, this is an abstraction. It's a way to collect all the pieces that belong to that piece of content, agnostic of its encoding and its codec, okay? But in a way that we can address it from a device. And if you want really specifics of what that means, I'll show you a picture in a minute, but the second draft that we reference up there is an example of a media encoding network for encoding MPEG-dash video. The vision, though, is that that's one way of doing MPEG-dash. There would be media encoding network definitions for HLS. There could be media encoding network definitions for other transport mechanisms or other encoding schemes. You define what you want for your particular encoding. This becomes a generic sort of container version way of looking at it. Okay, question?
Yeah, I'm relaying from the Jabber rooms. Sean Leonard asks, why not use the URN namespace? I think it's relating to the previous slide.
Right.
It is a URN, it's just a title.
I'm fine either way. I'm not my specialty is not naming, and I realize that there's a history of discussion on that topic. I'm neutral. Whatever you want to call it, we'll call it that. There you go. Next, please. So this is a picture of like an MPEG-dash encoding, where you would have a common prefix, and underneath that prefix would be assigned each of the different aligned encodes. These encodes are all aligned around iframes, if you know about MPEG-dash. And then all the shards or chunks or shards of the video then belong below these things. And in the draft for MPEG-dash, what you'll find is that when we assign addresses in that space, the addresses are aligned with the iframe alignments. So if you look at address X in one group, the same address X under another group will be where the iframe alignments take place. And that's how you do the switching. It's exactly the same way today that they do with, so in CDN space today, they just do with names. They assign the same name to both files with a small difference, and that's where I can do my transitions. In this case, we're assigning a 128-bit address in place of a name. That's very simply the proposal for MPEG-. Next. So how do you connect these two things? We got the what and we got the where. How do you find each other? So we have a new service we're proposing called the Media Address Resolution Service. It takes that descriptor that says what it is, and it provides me a mapping to all of the list of the where that it exists. And now, one thing you have to understand the subtlety here is, let's say I have a piece of content, and I've done an MPEG dash encode, and I've done an HLS encode, okay? Those two would both be given a distinct media encoding network reference, an address. So in the MARS service, what you then would have you'd have one entry for the title minions, then you would have two entries, each of them one being for each of the distinct media encoding network instances that represent that encode or that movie. So this becomes a way for me to find all of the encodings of the movie, and it's bidirectional. So once I have an encoding of the movie, I can also ask the thing, hey, what is this? What movie have I actually got here? And let me find other encoding versions of this. And this becomes a service then we can build things like smart caches that can find other caches nearby that have other versions of the same movie. Okay, does that make sense so far? All right, let's get into some, next slide, please. So, security and privacy, can't ignore these. As we previously mentioned, access control and DRM are application layer stuff. That still works, it still gets taken care of the way it does today. It doesn't have to change, but when you do want to switch between different services and encodings today, we would have to work on a keying problem. The DRM guys are working on that problem. There's another model, by the way, that could evolve if you had this in place. And that model is more like a dropship model, where if I want to become a video distributor, instead of what I do today, which is I go get the content, I encode it, I apply my DRM and lock it up, I can switch to be much more of a storefront, where maybe a new third party exists. He is the delivery agent for all those pieces of content, but I'm the storefront. And I now do the customer relationship stuff, but that other guy delivers a common encrypted format that works across multiple services. This starts enabling new delivery models that we don't do today. Does that make sense? If not, see me afterwards and we'll walk through it. And now, privacy. Privacy is a really interesting question here because, you know, one could look at the network and observe what people are watching. We're exposing that. And that's a bad thing in certain circumstances. Because it turns out in certain areas of the network that I have a relationship and I trust, like for instance, maybe my home network, I don't mind exposing that information. And from the guy I'm getting my video from, he knows what I'm watching already, so I can expose that to him as well. But the bit in between, I don't want to expose that information necessarily to. And so the proposal we have already with the scheme we have is that what we would do is create essentially a session level identifier for that video delivery. So that between my client and wherever that session level identifier gets terminated, it would be just a number. Like it is today. It wouldn't be known to the network, it wouldn't be known to people, they couldn't index it, they couldn't cross-reference it. But between myself and that termination point, it's private. After that termination point, where there's a CDN, he already knows what I'm watching. He would actually be able to terminate and translate it back to the actual name or the identifier, the address space of the movie that I'm watching. And we believe that this is a way that the privacy problem can be very clearly and easily solved. Next, please. Okay, so one of the points I want to make is we're not proposing Gigi as a end-to-end complete video solution that we're going to package up and ship. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose is to create a set of common standardized building blocks then that people that are innovating in the video delivery space and the video production space can build upon. That's why these things are very simple fundamentals. Identify what it is, identify where it is, and identify how to find and map between those two identifiers. We think that that would enable people that are building things like next generation caches, smarter devices, and even applications that do playback, multi-source creation would actually be able to coordinate amongst themselves using those as building blocks. And the goal here is to sort of spark a range of innovation, a new round of innovation for internet video. Next slide, please. So this is a list of a couple of basic ideas that started coming out of the use cases of things you can suddenly do with this, right? You can actually now have a device that's smart enough to find copies of the content it wants to play more locally. So this is an example of, I know I have a copy up in the cache at the CDN, but maybe I already have a copy in my home. This would allow that device to actually start making that decision. Now the device is actually a good place to make that decision because the CDN up at the core, he has no idea what content I have in my home because he doesn't manage my home. He manages the CDN. My device, on the other hand, is part of my home network. He actually would be able to find a device that is part of my home and work with him if he has, if the content is there to access it. This would enable that. Likewise, smarter interaction between video and video devices. Today, if you look at how people are attempting to do multi-recipient streams, so I've got a phone, I'm broadcasting, and I've got 100 people all watching it. They're going through some things, some exercises to make that work that are kind of kludgy. We think that this approach would start enabling them to make better access and delivery decisions by both the sender and the receiver. Because it's starting to push knowledge of the content that's flowing back out to the edge of the network at the devices that are both creating and the devices that are consuming it. And as well, network delivery optimizations, and actually new multi-source and multi-video delivery options. This is where things like, and if you look at the document, there's a use case where we talk about you have a video player that's playing an MPEG version of the video, but you have an audio device, and the MPEG version, the packaging doesn't contain the codec that audio device will work with. This, as we show in the document, the use case actually lets the audio device go, oh, you want to watch Minions. Let me go find an audio track for Minions that is compatible with the codecs I can decode. Now that I'm aware of that content, I can go off and do that. Today I can't. Next slide, please. And the other thing I would like to point out about video is we all have a mindset, at least I do. Video, in a lot of ways, is first generation video, what we call streaming, is really primitive. We've just translated the idea of a film that rolls and we get frame after frame after frame in sequence, and they come and we watch it. The next generation of video that we're starting to see emerge is a different model. It's a model where at the player, he actually is pulling in multiple pieces of content simultaneously, and he's assembling a whole new viewing experience at once, right? This could be, I'm watching video in the main window here, I've got a chat session going on here, down over here I've got a particular ad network I've subscribed to. I don't know why I'd want to watch ads, but if I did, I might have sports going on someplace else. And I might even be, by the way, taking that whole thing, re-aggregating, adding my own content to, and broadcasting it back out. The old model where it's a single stream, that doesn't work very well to do what I just described. These new models, however, they now allow me to start taking content and piecing it together in new dynamic ways that are customized for every viewing experience and every consumer. Got a question?
Jason Nichols. Other than the codecs and the players, isn't most of this work applicable also to audio?
Yes. But the reason we're focused on video because video is just, well, gosh, the big problem we have to deal with scaling. But absolutely, it does work with video, audio as well.
Thank you.
Is there a way for, is there a,
He said it.
Subodh Iyengar?
Sorry.
Yeah, I said it. Yeah, my voice. But does it spec define something like a concept like locality of the contents? Like how does this device decide which address is better for it or something like that?
So that's a very good question. Like I said, these are building blocks. So the intent is to build the fundamentals to allow the devices, to allow people to write devices that can then select the best content source. So that would be future follow-on work, either here or by somebody else entirely. But today they can't do it because they don't have the knowledge of what the content is or what the other content sources are. This becomes the building block then to let them build those things to discover and choose. Let's see here. Next slide, please.
Dave, are you coming up on this slide?
I think it was for the last one.
Oh.
Dave Crocker. So I have not read the spec, and therefore I won't criticize it, unlike IETF usual culture. But I think I understand what you've been describing. I think I understand the benefits that you're seeking. My suspicion is that the critical challenge in what you've described to get the benefit that you're looking for is Mars. And the reason is all these different names that you're going to support, and I understand why you did that. Note that for MIME, we did the same thing for character sets because at the time there was no single standard that was deployed.
Right.
And so the encapsulation approach is really the right thing to do rather than try to solve that unification problem. But now we have random people in random places looking up random names of which there's multiple namespaces. And those names have to be registered in this Mars service in a way that will get them found.
Yes.
I'm assuming at this stage that the Mars service doesn't solve that problem as much as identify it.
Correct. But the vision is that Mars would allow publishers of the content, if you're a publisher, if you're the publisher, not the guy on the camera, but the guy that's actually publishing it onto the internet, they would have a Mars service that they would have access control to, and that they would be able to register these publishing relationships in, and then publish it outwards. But since the stuff that gets registered in Mars are these generic identifiers, so let's talk about specifics. So minions. The IDER identifier for minions is the same IDER identifier that anybody could use when they publish, saying, I have minions that I'm publishing. And it would be the same minions identifier within their Mars realm that would get published. Does that
But
make
as
sense?
soon as you say something like Mars realm, that says there's multiple realms, and I have to know which one to look up.
So I'm pulling words from distributed systems terminology. It's work to be done, Dave. We haven't got everything done here. I'm not trying to say we have a complete solution, but we have a direction.
And I was only trying to raise the flag that from what you've been describing, my suspicion is the critical challenge is to figure out how to get arbitrary queriers to be able to find arbitrary publishers for the same identifier.
And I think we can do it, but you're right. It's a critical thing to do.
Next slide, you said?
Next slide, please. So this isn't just theory. We've built this darn thing, at least a prototype of it. And we're going to show it in bits and bytes on Thursday night. And if you also want to see a clip of the Minions movie, because the IETF loves Minions, I had to call in some favors at NBC to get permission to use clips from Minions, but we did it, yay. And we have it running. We have an MPEG dashing code of Minions in there. It works with a tablet. We're going to just pull out a tablet and play it. I say that because we did it in such a way that it's backwards compatible with the MPEG dash environment. We didn't break what works today. We've built upon it. We don't have to replumb the entire internet to do these things. We can just deploy them in addition to what's already there, and we get all the benefits. So please come by and see it. Next slide, please. So to date, we had a small little meeting, a few people in Yokohama to talk about this concept. And out of that came a non-working group mailing list. So there is a mailing list to talk about GG on today at the IETF. And we have 2 drafts that are out there. And we have a logo that's in the bottom corner. So it's starting to look like there's something to this.
Harald Alvestram. What design principles in your design prevents this from being a way to lock in content to the most powerful supplier? That is, sorry to use your company's name, but if I talk to the Comcast Mars server, what prevents an ecosystem where Comcast will absolutely refuse to acknowledge that I have an Amazon copy of the same movie on my hard disk?
So the vision for the Mars system isn't that there would be a Mars server for that company and a Mars server for this other company, that they would be, the idea would be that they were actually federated, just like the DNS is federated and open to everybody. We all see the same thing. The same thing with Mars. It would be open and across everybody. So you wouldn't have that lock-in.
So what's the incentive for people to federate? Speaking as someone who lost the battle for federation my own company for a couple of things. What's the reason why the dominant player would federate?
Because the ability to deliver video to your customer is part of your business you're in, and you have no, let me turn the question around. What would be their motivation to isolate themselves and block themselves off from everybody else? That's not how we do things on the internet.
And keeping Amazon out of the business.
That sounds like a policy discussion, not a technical question. So interesting topic, but let me just go to the last slide and we'll take your questions because it's really quick. Next slide, please. There, thank you. And then she's gonna do slides in a minute. So Ted.
Ted Hardy. I think I have a slightly different way of posing the question as a design question that Harold was asking, because I think there is a kind of an underlying design problem here. If you design something such that anyone can make an assertion about their ability to host a particular piece of content without any bar for who can make such an assertion, you run one risk, which is that somebody can make an assertion that this particular EIDR is available, but what they play out as content to you is not what should be at that EIDR. It's not minions, it's porn. Right?
That's a totally valid security concern. Well, you're right.
So let me go on. The result of that appears to be the case in the design as it's currently in your draft is that the Mars server would actually then have to vet particular media networks, MENS as you call them, to basically consider them trusted from the point of view of they're actually going to serve you the content that's associated with the content identifiers they provide. The result of that is that it does not in fact turn out to be an arbitrary set of couriers querying for an arbitrary set of suppliers. Instead, you have arbitrary couriers to a set of suppliers that is governed by whoever controls that bar.
Based upon whatever model you choose for doing the trust assertions. You're right. I mean, and we have things to draw upon from other areas that have tackled the same problem. And there's various solutions to, and part of the exercise here will be to explore those and with a lot of community input, select one that works for the internet.
So I think that there's a scoping problem here. And the scoping problem kind of comes down to a point that was being made by Mark earlier. If in fact what you want is for a particular device to be able to generate a content identifier that is usable, if it's truly from camera to thing, that content identifier generated by that camera has either one of two properties. It's highly linkable, so all content generated by that camera is linkable, and you know that the same camera was used to film Minions and porn, which you may not be very happy to know.
Holy.
Well, or
did we go there? Let's not go there.
Well, no. I mean, it's highly linkable. That the data that this camera produced is associated here and there, and there's a privacy concern
If you do
there.
such a straight one-off
If
association.
if you do it as this is the identifier authority is the producer of it in real the glass that did it, you have one concern about linkability that's quite serious, or it has to be able to produce it to feed into a system that's going to be able to associate that content with an identifier like an EIDR or some other content ID. In order to make the ecosystem work with that second model, you actually have to have as part of it how that works. How
So we have that. We have examples of that today, Ted.
I see, however, you're trying to build an ecosystem where you're defining building blocks, but there are kind of critical pieces missing.
So let me address the particular question about the identifiers. So we have existing identifier issuers alive and well today. So when you upload content to YouTube or Facebook, they're generating one for you today. When you are a professional content producer, you log into IDER with your IDER ID and you type in the information and you create the identifier. So those are two different models for how that works, but they're both alive and thriving ecosystems today. This doesn't create them, this uses them. The ones that already exist.
I will get to the back of the queue, but I'll point out that the problem that Harold raised was in part that if you're getting the identifier from a service which is a competitor in this space, it is not necessarily trivial to assume that they will then permit you to serve that content identifier from multiple other systems.
And you're right, in many places you can't, but the beauty of this thing is we're not tying it into one content identifier scheme. We're carrying content identifiers. So in fact, you're free to choose other content identifier schemes or choose them all and provide the mapping. It's a good point though. Yes, sir.
Dan York, a quick question. Thank you for running code as you're doing it to bits and bytes. My question was on a larger level. NBC Universal is obviously doing this. Who else are you working with, or have you been working with other folks in the larger industry around this?
It's an interesting question. So within the W3C context, we had a large group of industry partners, but the rules for that group were you could participate without signing up to endorse any of the output. So it was because we wanted to encourage participation. But you know, I'll let other people come to the microphone if they're interested in talking. So we have NBC, we have Comcast, and there are other people we've been talking to, but I won't say their names. I'll give them the chance to say their own name.
Thanks.
Brian Rosen, 2 comments. One is I have read the draft, and I think that I think that the way you describe it, the way you wrote the slides and the way the intro to the draft runs is misleading because you really are only talking about the content delivery part of it. It has nothing to do with bandwidth. It has nothing to do with creation of content. It's just how you get it. What's the optimal way to do it? I think you would be better off making a better description of what problem you're trying to solve.
Okay. Yeah, let me answer that and I'll jump up. It's a fair point. The reason we do intend to do like the full thing, but we had to start somewhere. It's a very big ocean, and we thought that tackling the delivery problem was the #1 source of pain today and the #1 big win for the scalability problem. Video creation, that side of things, and the other entire workflow is something we did talk about in the W3C use cases, but we didn't bring that into here yet because we had to start someplace, and this is the place we started for the biggest bang.
Well, okay, but perhaps you could say that. There was I had a small technical thing, which is more to Leslie and the other folks who are the IETF guys, but you might think about making a second-level URN rather than a first-level URN for the type because of the overhead and what it takes to go a top-level URN is probably not what you want for this, and you probably want something more specific to this thing. So you might want a URN, EIGG, EID, one of those things, because the mechanisms that we have for creating top-level URNs is probably more onerous than you want and probably less appropriate for what you want than what we're doing.
And certainly I think we have a to-do, which is to write a draft about that, which then get those exact kind of comments. I'm going to give the floor to Leslie because we're running out of time and I want to make sure she can use her couple slides.
You want yours or?
Yeah,
okay.
They're in the deck. Yeah. Yeah, just first of all, a couple of meta level comments for framing this. The work here is sort of we're at a delicate balance point. We're at that delicate balance where we're trying to convey enough of this to demonstrate that it's real and has had enough thought to deserve more thought, but also not that we have all of the answers because we clearly don't. So a little bit of the one-on-one with Glenn is, it's always fun sparring with Glenn, but it really would actually be more interesting to have this in the context of a discussion of, well, more generally. And so we originally asked actually to have a BOF session, even though I think we knew we weren't quite ready for that. But absent actual other people being, stepping up and saying, yes, we want to pursue this, there was no real motivation to have a BOF. So really what I'd like to get out of this discussion is enough interest from other parties to say, yeah, there's something here for us to go and work on and see if we can frame it up more generally than just the work done so far so that we can have a BOF at some future point. Next slide, please. So one of the particular questions is, well, why would you do video this way anyway? Because we've already solved the bandwidth problem this way, that way, compression, whatever. We've solved latency and jitter. We can do good things with video now, and there are certainly proprietary solutions for handling video within particular contexts. My thesis is that at some point relatively soon, As you see the evolution of applications and things that people are doing with video, and we know that people will surprise us with what they will do with video. Certainly they've been surprising access networks for a few years. That at some point there becomes sort of a divide between what any set of siloed proprietary solutions or individual one-off solutions to addressing particular problems can deal with. Which leads us to some future point where either we have a bunch of siloed solutions to individual pieces of dealing with video and content stuff, or we sink our teeth into it now, take it on as an architectural problem, to use one bad word, and look at it from the standpoint of application infrastructure, to use a few more bad words, and maybe go back and actually address some of the things that in the application area we were trying to deal with 20 years ago, but couldn't close on, because when you talked about things like discovery services in general, without an actual driving use case, it was pretty easy to get lost and founder and never get beyond the discussion of generalities. Next slide, please. So that's why when I think about this, I think that there is definitely IETF work for this in the area, in other areas, in the routing area, in terms of lower layer compatibility. If IPv6 addresses are used, how do you make sure that you're actually allocating them in a way that's consistent with existing expectations and rules, and how do you actually route them, so on and so forth. Mars, lookup service, federated, DNS, SCI, again, really? Maybe. But I don't think that any of this works unless it's actually driven by a coherent plan at the application level, which is what I think GG actually represents. Glenn acknowledged that he's sort of scratching at one particular part of the problem with the, focusing on the delivery part right now. But I actually think that there is the possibility of looking at this stuff as something like a complex data type for applications. And what does that mean? And how could we think about application data such that there are individual components that fit together in some sort of structure that gets handled in a more sophisticated way than just put get. So I think that from that perspective, looking at it in terms of what are the building blocks that we can build and what's the toolbox that we could have at the application layer, whether it's, how do you identify the video components, whether it's, arguing about which type of URN to use or whatever, discovery, identification, and location, and all of that all over again. I think that if we look at this work through that lens and up level a bit, maybe we can have a discussion about how this is interesting from the standpoint of how we can move not just one particular standard forward, but, application infrastructure for the internet.
So I think we want to run the dispatch process on this. So that the mic can run, or the queue can run to completion, but after that, we're going to start asking the standard questions. So go ahead.
Phil Baker. Yeah, I was a bit worried when somebody comes up to the mic with a naming problem and then says they're not doing naming. This is all about naming. In particular, I think it's also basically about security from start to finish, and in particular about authentication. And the confidentiality issue here, if you set this thing up, you're going to be leaking information that's commercially sensitive from one supplier to another. Amazon does not want Netflix to know what movies it is supplying. Netflix doesn't want Amazon to know. There's a lot of value. So I'm not at all convinced by your use case. However, I do think there's a lot of value here in some infrastructure. I would suggest that one of the things you do, though, is to separate the problem of how do we identify the Minions movie from how do we identify and authenticate Minions movie streams.
Well, again, that's the separation, and I'm with you. That's the separation that is very much the what and versus the where. The where is the second part of what you're talking about, the streams. Streams is a where.
No, streams is a what. Because if I've got that stream encoded in 6 different ways, those 6 different ways, I might have one of them locally, I might not.
Right.
But regardless of where they are, they should have the same SHA-2 hash. Now, you don't want to use a straight SHA-2 hash because you're going to be streaming these. You want to be able to authenticate them without reading the entire stream. So there are some security tricks that you want to get into there. But the what is a property of the stream, and that stream can be duplicated in multiple places.
So one of the ways to start thinking about content is less as a stream and more as a collection of shards you have to manage. Because that's why I'm saying, like, first generation video really was stream based. It was, I got bits and I got to move them over here. And we just built a really good infrastructure for moving bits. This is taken it to another level where we now don't have to manage streams. We manage shards, or whatever you want to call it in your way of doing this. But it now creates a new way of composing video. And so, interesting questions, good concerns, I agree. But I think the goodness here actually is that it disrupts the existing way we've solved some of this stuff and creates new problems that we will have to solve. But along with those new problems come a whole bunch of new abilities we don't have today.
Yeah, well, the final thing I was going to suggest that you look at is SAML, because SAML is an infrastructure for making assertions that have got security properties.
I know SAML very well.
And this type of thing is actually one of the things that the assertion infrastructure was originally designed. The original commission was to design an assertion infrastructure for this. It was applied later in OASIS to authentication and authorization, right. But this was actually the original use case.
Okay.
This is Barry Lieba, chair of the URN BIS working group, and I want to respond to Brian briefly, just because I'm afraid it's going to come up again. We, the URN BIS working group, are changing the process for getting URN namespaces, and there are plenty of technical issues to deal with here that I don't want us to get wrapped around what namespaces we use at this point, so let's please not do that.
Hi, I'm Colin Perkins. So I agree with a lot of the previous speakers that what seems to me the essential part here is the name resolution service and the security properties and so on associated with that. I tend to think you're not going far enough in the name resolution. You're talking about, rather than the streams, you're talking about shards. Well, I think we should be talking also about particular frames within shards. And I think you're building assumptions about the type of delivery. You seem to have an MPEG style model behind it. And I think we have a history of coming up with new and interesting ways of delivering media. And I think it would be desirable if your naming scheme could work for something beyond perhaps Dash, and to be able to identify sub-bits of shards, for example. So for the people doing the multicast delivery or the this or the that delivery, that they can also use this similar sort of naming and resolution scheme.
So the envision of the media encoding network is that it's like a template that you can define for whatever delivery format is there. So in your example of not Dash, but this other scheme, the idea there is you actually would define a media encoding network definition for working with individual frames if that's what you wanted to work with. I mean, and that becomes then a generic way to do that across other formats. So we very carefully try to define it so that it's not specific to Dash or HLS or anything that exists today. It's instead it's a template, it's an abstraction that you then define for Dash or for HLS or for the new thing you just came up with yesterday.
Yes, and my impression is that it assumes this type of model that Dash and HLS and so on are using for delivery via shards.
And maybe it doesn't need to be expanded. I mean, if you have other
be
examples of other encoding mechanisms, it'd be interesting to hear them. Because, like I say, we worked with what we had as a starting point.
I mean,
and we're open to do more.
Sure. I mean, but plenty of people have and are using multicast. For example, we've had things like RTSP in the past. I'm sure we will have others in the future. Following on from that, this idea of using IPv6 addresses to identify frames essentially makes me very nervous.
Well, what about that makes you nervous?
I mean, I'm not a routing person, but that seems to be some really interesting sort of routing and addressing and address management.
It's an interesting problem space, yes.
And
don't be afraid.
It to me doesn't seem necessary. maybe I'm missing something, but I don't understand the benefit of that over just resolving to a particular URN or a URL for the particular content and pointing to one of the existing
Let me
delivery
say one benefit
mechanisms.
we did see. So this is actually something practical. So Grav here is the partner we've been working with from Drexel University to build the prototype to test it out to see if it works. And one of the things we discovered just this past week, we were trying to do a debug of a media flow that wasn't working properly. Turned out actually having the address space exposed that way made debugging the problem really super easy. Like it was like at the moment it happened, wow, that's actually a real benefit of this because it makes things far less hidden in layers. It exposes it to what you want to do debug. It made it very easy.
It makes certain types of debugging with certain types of tools very easy and makes other types of things very difficult, I expect.
Okay.
I just wanted to raise the concern that this seems to me a very big change in the way addressing IPv6 addresses are used, and that makes me very nervous.
So certainly I hear you, because it certainly made me nervous, and it probably still makes me nervous. But I think that the right way to look at it is to understand exactly what are the extents of what is an IP address for and how is it being used. And I don't, in putting this up here, now that's
sorry.
In putting it on the slide, I was not suggesting that the dispatch working group would be the right place, or even the Artarea would be the right place to make sure that we, pursued those things. Rather, those are other parts of the IETF that should stress test those aspects.
Yes, there are a bunch of very separable work items.
I'm Mark Townsley. I am a IPv6 network and routing guy. These guys haven't been alone. I've been talking to Glenn about this for a couple of years now, at least. In particular, on the delivery side and the use of IPv6 in this particular case. And it hasn't just been us. We had a joint École Polytechnique and Cisco Paris Innovation Research Lab symposium back in March. If you look up PIRL for Paris Innovation Research Lab .tech in your browser, you'll get, assuming you don't completely crash the website now, you can look in there for a presentation from Jamie Panagos of Time Warner Cable, now Charter, where you'll see some of these concepts coming out, not only in their deployed service, but where they want to take it going forward. Now, admittedly, that's more on the delivery side, but it might help some of those questions, valid questions about the use of IPv6 in this way. What I like about what I've seen today and this context here is really the focus on the hard problems that are above the network routing and addressing. There are issues we've got to deal with on the ground there, but really, as has been said many times, the hard part is in the security, is in the naming, and in the mapping service and all that. And that's why it's so important to have domain experts of the application available to make sure we're doing things correct all the way down on the ground as we do go through a pretty significant transition in terms of, oh, I have all this address space, maybe I can use it this way. And I want to say it's not just the content guys that are using IPv6 in different ways than in IPv4. In very, very, very massive, if not the most massive in the world, at least the top 3 data centers where IPv4 has been turned off, the temptation is there, and it's starting to play out, where things as granular as a process ID running on a compute node end up with an individual IPv6 address. Okay? And then you think about 100 billion sensors in your IoT world, or 1 trillion sensors out there, all with IPv6 addresses. Somehow the network's going to figure out how to read that memory that says this is the temperature here, just as you would read, oh, here's a frame of a minion, right? This is an interesting use case of IP, but it's not the only one. It's part of a general trend. Now that we have enough scale of IPv6 deployment to start thinking about those things.
Well, I'll say thank you for the time listening to me and Leslie. Please read the drafts. please send mail to the GG list or corner me, and I will be very, very, very happy to talk at length about this. Probably more than you want to talk about it, but I'll be happy to do it.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and talk a little bit about where this work should be moving. So the first question is there a sense that there is work to do in IETF in this space? Can we get a hum if people believe there is work to do in IETF in this space? Okay. And then hum if you don't think there is work for IETF in this space. Okay. A tiny hum. So it does seem like these folks should go off and continue to refine this. I don't think we're ready to decide, oh, we're going to form a working group. This probably, if this is going to move forward, it probably needs an official BOF, right? Okay. If an AD wants to speak, or if you think we can talk about this again next time and dispatch it maybe, but.
Alyssa Cooper. So as a general matter, we don't always need a BOF to charter a working group. We've done a bunch of working groups without a BOF. This is obviously a kind of wide-ranging set of topics, and so I can imagine that a BOF would be a useful thing to do here, but certainly the discussion should start. We should happen a bunch on the list ahead of time, whether it then looks like we need a BOF or not, right?
Correct.
All that charter discussion can happen on the list in the meantime. No need to wait for the next IETF week.
Correct. It should happen on dispatch.
Dispatch.
Yes. GGIE, if you want to talk about bits and bytes of what they're going to do, that's fine, but we need the charter and the work that's going to happen in IETF to happen on dispatch.
Yep.
Stefan?
Stefan Wenger, my hope would be that this would be, if this is going to be done here, this has to be more than one working group. This is way too diverse a set of topics.
Yeah, I mean, we've handled it different ways, different times, right? Some charters have, explicit, you must work with working group X, Y, and Z, et cetera, right? But I'll let ADs talk. That's there.
Yeah, Alyssa Cooper. I think like the immediate next step is to try and break this down into its component pieces and see what all of those look like when we get a little more concrete around what the work is, and then we can figure out, is it a working group or two or none or three or whatever, and which areas as well, because there's some of this which is clearly not for the art area.
Okay, so do you want to do this video clip?
I think I might have it. Hold on.
Just one comment on how to split things up. One approach I do not recommend is splitting it up in 15 different work items and parceling them out to existing working groups. That is part of the reason why RTC Web took 5 years. So far.
Is Matt Miller in the room?
Hi, I'm Andrew Sullivan. So I've been listening to this with interest, and I read this draft before. It is obvious to me that this really needs a BOF, that there's a lot of work to do here, and I would encourage those who have been working on this to sort of try to identify discrete components for organizing that BOF, because I think it could be really useful, but it seems to me that there are at least some large chunks here that are really separate kinds of stuff.
Andrew, how are you doing that? It's awesome.
I got to tell you that the skills you learn as IEB chair are ones you didn't know you had. So that's really the only recommendation that I have.
Don't need it? They're saying no.
Okay, that's fine then. Okay.
One last plea, Leslie Daigle. I do think the bits and bytes demo is actually really compelling. I'm disappointed that we weren't able to get our act together to get the video shown in this session. We have it.
I finally got it through.
Okay, good. But still, come see it at Bits and Bytes.
Did you want to see it?
It's a short little snippet.
How do you find it? How do you find it?
So the first version of this protocol is they email it to me.
Posted where?
There, full screen.
So what we have is a clip of the Minions. It's playing in an HTML5 based video player.
you can actually play it. And what we did was we took the actual clip and broke it down using MPEG Dash. So you break it down into smaller segments of video, 4 seconds in length. It's encoded at multiple bit rates. Then we take each segment of video and we assign an IPv6 address. And that's the address that you're actually seeing overlaid on the screen. Underneath that, we break it down into this concept that we call media encoding networks. And Glenn talked a little bit about that, and there's some more details in our draft. But the idea is when the player has knowledge of the media encoding network, it can do things like switch bit rates just by looking at a different subnet in the actual media encoding network. Now, each piece of this segment is identified, each content is identified on the network layer by a v6 address without changing the host stack or anything like that. So you can do some interesting things like in this. Here we're going to show it actually switching to a different cache seamlessly just by manipulating the routing table. Now, underneath the video itself, there's the IDAR, and the IDAR is the entertainment industry identifier for movie and television assets. And we took the IDAR, and just as kind of for this demo, we embedded it into a DNS, into a FQDN. And the player, when it starts up, all it gets is that FQDN. It does a lookup, connects to that, and downloads some manifest information that describes the media encoding network. And that's what it uses to actually play back. But again, this is a standard off-the-shelf web browser. We didn't make any modifications to the MPEG-Dash player. All the stuff is MPEG-Dash compliant. And in this demo, we use MPEG-Dash, but you can use HLS. You can use any other kind of transport scheme that you want. And like we said, we have a full live demo of this at Bits and Bytes. I hope people stop by. Thank you. Yeah, sorry. Gaurav Nayak, Drexel University.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Come out. There we go. So back to this. And so with the remaining time, we have any other business people who want to come to the mic and stop rubbing balloons on the mic. We have, yeah, go ahead, John. And by the way, is Jill Hildebrand in the room? Did you want to talk about the regex thing or not? No, okay, thank you.
I feel like such a total anticlimax. I have no video, I have no audio, I have no mic. Yes, I have no mic.
You definitely have no audio.
Can we hear? Yes. Do I have audio now? Okay. I have two teeny drafts that I would like to get. I would like to either get dispatched or not dispatched. The first is draft Levine Hercula One Click, and my co-author is here to find out whether they're interested in it. This is a tiny little tweak to the list unsubscribe header and email, and it turns out that the bulk email industry cares deeply about this. And and in particular, like if you're a Gmail user, if you mark something, if you say something is spam, it'll pop up a little box saying you want us to unsubscribe at the same time we mark it as spam. And Gmail would really like a reliable way to do that without having to interact with you, because currently, the typical unsubscribe currently, you do a get. It does a get. It brings back a page that says, "Are you sure you want to unsubscribe from our fabulous content?" And you click yes. And it does this partly because they can't believe you want to leave, but also partly because spam filters have a bad habit of fetching every URL, and they can't tell whether it's you doing it or it's your spam filter doing it. So the goal here is simply to come up with something that does a post in a way that is analogous to that second click. It can be done non-interactively, and people at Gmail telling me that they're ready to implement this like yesterday. So if we want to have it, so so they're going to implement something. I mean, Tobias and I have already worked together to go through and make this something that sort of matches the standards a little better than the original idea. And if people are interested in this, I would like to dispatch it through either Artarea if it's still alive or whatever the equivalent is.
It's not, but yeah.
Yeah, but like
Yeah,
but it ain't. We've had some productive bike shedding on it already, and and again, either like I would like your advice to do it, and if you're not, if people don't think it's interesting enough, I'll ask you what AT sponsored or something.
Well, that would probably be what we would do anyways, because it's a small work item, and it's certainly not worthy of a working group.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely
right,
not.
right. So that's probably how we would do it. We'd probably go ahead and, we'll do that call on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And before you go to the next one, where's the other blue sheet thing? One of the reasons the blue sheets are important is capacity planning, and it's obvious that we missed the mark on this one. So if you didn't sign the blue sheets, please make sure you do. I had the other one right here. All right, go to your next one.
Okay, the other draft is one that Brian Haberman and I put together a little while ago. It is about, it turns out there already is a spec for how you set up a web server to act as a PGP or S/MIME key server. There's a spec like, here's the queries you make and here's the answers you get back. It hasn't been used much because at this point there's no way to discover other than like the general PGP key servers. There is considerable interest now in mail providers providing key servers for their users, and we understand like there's all sorts of semantic issues. To what extent is a provider able to vouch for the identities of their users? But on the theory that all existing key distribution so far has been a failure. This is, again, I have interest from some large providers in this. This isn't quite as tiny a tweak, but it's still pretty small. And all it does is it invents a server, it invents an SRV record, so a domain can say, here's where my key server is. And it also provides a way for a sort of a Daneful way for a domain to say, here's my signing key for PGP, and here's my signing key for S/MIME, so that if you were inclined to take the domain's word for who its users are, which makes sense if like they're your employees, then it's a straightforward way to look it up, sort of keeping as much of the existing verification in place as is practical. I got some interest. I have considerable interest in this from Gmail. The Gmail guys have scheduled conflicts, so they won't be here until tomorrow. But they would be happy to talk with me and anybody else who's interested about it. So it's the same thing. It's like if you guys are interested, I could stand all the. We would like useful advice, but if you're not, we'll go off and do some AD sponsored thing because they want to implement it.
Hi, Philham Baker. Yeah, there is actually one that's similar for S/MIME, but that predates Dane.
Well, this is on top of that.
Yes. Well, so it is
basically it says if you publish an SRV record that is DNSSEC signed, that points to a server whose certificate is also Dane validated, then this is a Dane approved way to get stuff from that server.
Yeah, it would be good if we had one way of validating that particular part of the trust chain, regardless of whether it was S/MIME or PGP, and that we try and get to convergence rather than divergence.
I can't believe you haven't read my draft. It explains all this.
It was any of the business.
But yeah, no, that's. Yeah, the reason I wrote this is exactly that. We want one way to do it, so that if, for example, 3 large providers publish this stuff, they do it in a consistent way. And I've been talking, in other meetings, I talk to these large providers, and there finally is some interest in this. So I think we have some possibility of getting traction here. I think I'm done.
Okay. On the lists, we'll talk about solicit the feedback you're looking for, and then we'll dispatch it on the list. Probably doesn't need any more face time. Is there any other business for dispatch? Mark.
So not as tall as John. Yeah. I brought up in the Apps Area Working Group a while back that I had started working on an RFC 5988 BIS, which is the web linking specification. And I brought it up on the mailing list, about a week ago, I think, and didn't get much in the way of response that was substantive, at least. Basically, this is a specification to define how linking works in the web in the generic model that was first kind of done in the link header and also in HTML, and was later done in Atom, and it aligns those 3 into one model and describes a registry for link relations. There's been a lot of discussion on that repo from different communities. What working group and the W3C both have input to this because they have similar interests. And it's basically a BIS document that I was trying to get up before, but the network is not friendly to me right now for some reason. It basically is a cleanup and changing the way that the INO relationship with the experts works a bit, which I've been talking to Michelle Cotton about. There is a change list at the bottom of the draft, and I've been working on it now for probably about 2 or 3 years, I'd say. And it's just getting to the point where, yeah, we should probably actually bring it into some place. And so my question for dispatch is where? It was originally AD sponsored. I forget, Alexi, did you sponsor that or was that somebody else? I forget. It was maybe it was a Barry.
Well, and then well, go ahead and post the question, bring this to dispatch, because we have not seen this on dispatch, right?
I put it on the list of
Oh, okay,
About a week
after
ago.
the deadline. Okay, that's fine.
the deadline.
Yes, but go ahead and post it. We'll talk about it on dispatch. Again,
Okay.
the one thing is we don't, like Alyssa highlighted, we don't require a meeting, so we can dispatch things between meetings.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And yeah, so I guess the question is would an AD still be willing to sponsor it or should it need a
Yeah,
working
well,
group?
We get to pick which one, doesn't it?
Is that how this works?
No,
I
it's
screwed
totally
it
not
up.
how it works.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Any other business for dispatch? Seeing none, we'll see you in Seoul. If you haven't signed the blue sheets, please come up and do so. If you have blue sheets, please bring them up. Thank you. About
Okay, and that's my dealie, Bob, remember?
Yes, sorry. That was close.
Well, one time Colin stole my power cord. I get to the next thing, it's like, hey, I have no power. Right, yeah. That's probably a good idea. Oh, no, we should definitely do that. Yeah, that's a good idea. No, it's a good idea. No, it's a good idea. Take care
conviction and some confidence that put Paris on the Every time I travel anywhere outside of the US, I get the warning email that always says avoid demonstrations and non-public gatherings. I'm not sure if that gets capitalized.
Thank you.